Hello, Mr. Vale. These are my parents, Jerry and Carol Walsh, and here's my report. What did you do for entertainment
When?
when you were my age?
When we were your age. Well, we went to a lot of dances, and Friday nights was usually the movies in town here, and Saturday night we usually had dances.
Well, I was from Frankfurt, and we did sort of the same thing. We used to have dances, but we used to have them in the town hall on Friday nights. And then on Saturday nights, there used to always be a dance at the school. Or sometimes they'd have a roller skating party where they let you actually roller skate in the gym, which I'm sure Mr. Panis would absolutely love, in the Ilion gym. But they did let us do that. They also had, every once in a while, once a year or twice a year, they'd have donkey basketball games where they'd bring in, they'd have either the teachers ride donkeys and play against this team, or they'd have be quiet, or they'd have the seniors, I think, one time did that. And I was into sports. I did a lot of sports, so usually I was involved in that sort of thing. And that was entertaining, too, to, go to sports watch. I was a cheerleader, and we used to do all those kinds of things.
What was the cost of the dances?
Dances probably were 50 cents at the schools. A lot of the Elks clubs and the Knights of Columbus, a lot of times they wouldn't even charge you for it. Or if they did, if they didn't charge you, you might have to buy sodas or something like that for a dime. But sometimes they just do it in reverse, so that they give you the free sodas and they only charge you $1 to get in. But there was always plenty of the sodas and hot dogs and things like that to have at these dances too. When the clubs put them on. At the high school, it was just to put on usually a rock or a disc jockey type of a thing. Would come in and do it.
Ours were 50 cents. That's the only thing I remember. And the school dances, unless it was a big, semi-formal or something like that, and they would charge more. But, regularly it was about 50 cents. And they used to sell out. I mean, you couldn't even get in the gym. So, you'd have to go early to make sure that, because they'd allow, I don't know, only so many people.
Fire laws. And
Well, but they didn't have, you always see these capacity of building a certain amount. We didn't really have those things in those days, but somehow they knew how many, I guess they just kept track of how many tickets they sold.
What was the cost of the prom back in your high school time?
That'd be a good question.
I don't know. I only went to one prom, and the only thing I can think of is probably the tuxes were probably $13 for a tux. And that was all decked out. If you just got the typical model, it was probably $10. But that extra $3, not too many people would ever want to pay that extra $3. Seems funny now, but nobody really wanted to go out that extra $3 to get the fancy tux. As far as the price of a prom, I can't recall. I don't even know if there were tickets. I don't know if we had to pay for them.
I was just thinking, our proms were always held in the gym. We never went to restaurants or any place like that. They were always in the gym, and the gym was completely decorated. I remember one time, my junior year, I was one of the chair people for it, and we actually built this little picket fence. Well, I didn't, but the guys in shop built this picket fence and painted it white and everything. And we had all these artificial flowers we made of things. We had a pond in there with reflecting something or other, I don't know. But I don't know if you had to pay
I don't think
for the prom. We did go out to dinner beforehand. Limos, you'd never have a limo, going to a prom. That was unheard of. You would never have done that. And mostly the dresses, a lot of people bought them, but a lot of the mothers sewed. And they made the girls' dresses, and you're always very proud of the fact that, that your mother made the dress or designed the dress or something along those lines.
I had 3 sisters, and I can remember my mother sewing right up until she'd send one out, and the other one couldn't leave because her dress wasn't done yet. And then she would be leaving, and then it was always the last one, but it was always like an hour before the last one would go, from the time the first one left to the last one. So it brings back a lot of memories when you mention prom dresses being sewn at home.
What was the economy of the period you grew up like?
was the economy.
Yeah.
Well, I can remember my mother going off to work, and I think I was in 5th grade or something like that. But up until then, she was a stay-at-home mom, and you know, everything was very tight. The typical Saturday night was a bottle of pop and make your own popcorn, and there was 5 of us kids, and we'd go out and we'd buy a 6-pack of Coke, and all 5 of us kids would have 1 Coke, and that would have to last you the week. We didn't go out and buy another 6-pack for the rest of the week or every night, so you'd only have 1 Coke like during the week. And you know, it was just kind of a stay at home on the weekends, and very rare when you were really small did you run off to the movies. And it was just kind of you know, it's not like it seems like there's more money in circulation now than there was then. People were very tight with their money, I think, in those days.
They didn't have enough. My parents didn't have an awful lot. Neither one of my parents graduated high school. My father was an immigrant from Ireland, and when he got to the 8th grade, his family had, let's see, there were 10 or 11 of them that were here in Ilion. And when they got to be 8th graders, it was just known that that was the end of your education, because that was more education than his parents had. So he got a job, and he would help support his family. And so he didn't have, you know, any kind of skills or anything that would get him a good job. My mom was an orphan and ended up being adopted by someone to take care, because the wife was sick. So when my mother was in 8th grade, she also had to quit work to take care of her stepmother. So therefore, neither one of them had any, they were unskilled laborers. My mother never went to work. I think I was either in 2nd or 4th grade, I'm not really sure. But she was a stay-at-home mom until then. And my father worked, he worked for the railroad for a while. He worked for Univac, I believe, for a very short time. He finally ended up with a steady job with the county highway department, and then with the state. He ended up working for the state highway department. And money was very, very tight in those days, but we never knew it, because it always seemed to me that we had everything that everybody else did, because nobody had, I mean, kids didn't have cars in those days. Very rarely were you allowed to take your parents' car. Not like you go to the high school, you can barely get up there because there's so many cars, because kids are driving their own cars. Like that was that would be an unheard of kind of thing. And as I said, my mom sewed. We all had beautiful clothes. Everyone envied my sister and I my wardrobe. But it was because my mother, was very economical. She worked for the dress factory, and she'd be able to get remnants, and she'd make things. And we didn't even have soda. They didn't buy soda for us. My mother, they had a grape arbor, and I can remember my mother used to make grape juice and bottle it herself. And she used to can all the fruit and all that sort of things. And that's what all the families did. Let's see, I can remember being sent down to the store to buy a rump roast. It was on sale for 99 cents a pound, and that was a very, very good buy in those days. And so that would be our big treat on Sunday. We'd always have a rump roast, which is a type of roast beef. Economy wasn't great, and I think like my parents were they grew up during the Depression, so they valued everything that they had, and they taught us to value everything.
I can remember talking about things, buying gas for the lawnmower, and you go down to where what we called it Clipples. It's where your beauty place is there, and that dance studio, I guess, is still the karate studio.
Touch of Class. It's where Touch of Class.
Well, they used to have little pumps on the side of there, and we could go down there and ride on your bike and pick up a gallon of gasoline to put in the lawnmower, and I think it was something like 15 cents a gallon. Far cry from what it is today.
What is your political philosophy?
I remember answering this one the last time, and I probably had the same thing. I don't know. I don't really have a political philosophy, probably, because I don't really think there's a big difference between any of the parties that run. I think that hands are tied as far as what you can do. I think we're really having some big problems now But I think these problems have been created from years of not looking into the problems. I think that, like, the cuts that are being made, I don't like the cuts that are being made by our president and our governor, but I think that these people, you know, see these budgets that are way out of whack, see the deficits that we're in, and I think that there's not much that can be done other than cut, unless you want to continue to spend, in which case your generation is going to be in more trouble than we are. What do you think, Jer? Politically speaking.
Politically speaking,
We don't talk about religion and politics, do we? So.
as a business person, we're always taught you never talk about politics and religion, and yet the man that taught me that was always talking politics and religion in the shops. I'm going to pass on that one.
Who have you voted for and why?
Who have we voted for president?
Yeah, anything.
If I told you who my first president was, I'd be dating myself, I guess. But
I don't even remember who the first one I voted for.
good question. The past election, I really didn't vote for the president, Clinton. I just didn't think that he was going to be doing all the things that he was saying he was going to be doing. He was just going to, you know, try to get into the job and not really didn't know what he was getting himself into. I didn't believe, so I voted for Bush.
I voted for Clinton just so I could negate his vote, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't happy with Bush. I'm not thrilled with Clinton.
She wasn't pleased with the way I voted.
I didn't know. I don't think we knew we had voted against each other till we walked out and he said he voted for Bush and I said I voted for Clinton, and we figured, well, there goes one, even Steven kind of thing. I think probably the only thing that I really like to see, well, two things actually. I look for education things. I am, of course, a teacher, so that's important to me. But also we have felt, because your father's in a small business, we've learned to look at small business policies and taxes on that. We've seen a drastic change in that through the years since you started. With just when you do your income tax, seeing what deductions you can take and what you can't take. So I kind of pay more attention to that sort of thing now than I did before. But that's one area I've never been really good in, is politics, because I don't believe it makes that much difference. So kind of shun it whenever I can.
What were your thoughts about the Vietnam War?
Vietnam War. Well, when they first started taking action over there, it was just kind of like everybody. Well, there's just a few people going over there. But by the time I graduated high school, it seemed like probably half of the guys that you knew were going over there. And myself, they didn't want me in the service because I had a bad eye, and they said that's we don't need people with one bad eye and can't see out of the other, so they never took me. But the guys that I spoke to that went there said that I felt kind of bad because some of the guys you knew were going over there, and they said, don't feel bad, if you can stay out of it any way at all. He says, after going over there, he says it's just chaos over there. He says you're better off just staying home because you're not doing any service. Just keep your nose out of it, in other words. So it was a bad time for the country.
Yeah, it was. I had people that I graduated from high school with that were killed in Vietnam. And so I think that really hit home to me when you thought, a year or two you were fooling around in high school in the halls, and suddenly this person that you knew was dead. And the sad part about it was the first person that died from friendly fire, which meant he was shot by our own, patrols. And I can remember going to the funeral home and seeing his family and everything, and how that affected me. I can always remember that. I had a cousin who got hurt over there, not seriously, but he was permanently, disabled to a certain degree. And I had a very good friend, a next door neighbor, who had to go over. In fact, that's how your father got to be in your aunt and uncle's wedding, because Tommy had to
Got
go.
drafted.
He got drafted, and so Dad and I were going together then.
Second
Your-
choice.
Your aunt knew that we would eventually get married, so she figured that he was a good choice. But it just affected people in so many ways. I was in college at the time, and of course a lot of the guys and even the girls were protesting against it drastically, because a lot of times people just went to college so that they wouldn't have to be drafted. They didn't believe in it. And I can remember seeing, TV clips and things like that, and knowing some people who were over there and feeling very bad. I always thought, gee, they'd feel terrible if they knew what was going on in the country, because that's got to be a tough thing just to be in a war and possibly losing your life, and then knowing that a lot of the country doesn't even care because they don't even want you over, they didn't want you over there anyway. And I think that there's a lot of problems that were caused certainly while the war was being fought over there, but once the people came back, there was a lot of bitterness. And I think that we see that every once in a while. You'll see in some of the people who get in trouble sometimes, you'll see in their history, they were in Vietnam, and whatever happened to them over there, it affected their life. So I think that that's a war we're paying for in so many ways, and it was the first war we we didn't win.
It was a funny thing because all the protesters were always saying, get our troops out of there. And when we finally did get the troops out of there, the protesters didn't want to know anything about the guys that came home. They were kind of like, well, we really don't want to associate with you. You're kind of the bad guy that was over there in Vietnam. And the poor guys, they didn't want to be over there any more than the man in the moon. So it kind of, for all these guys that wanted these guys to come home, when they finally came home, you think they'd throw a parade and say, finally we get our guys to come home. That's what they were protesting, stop the war. When they finally stopped the war and got the guys to come home, they really weren't shown a lot of appreciation when they did come home.
And very little respect. And, it was very tough on them, and I think many of them became very, very bitter. Many of them also died as a result of, not injuries, but the things that happened to them, like that Agent
Broken hearts,
Orange
yeah.
and things like that, where, the government, I guess, is really to blame for using things that they shouldn't have used because they weren't tested properly, and then they used them around human beings.
Just recently, just last week, we saw something where they were testing it up by Fort Drum, the Agent Orange spray that they were spraying the woods up there. So we could have been contaminating our own people here just by experimenting with these things. So.
But it was a very, very tough thing, and I think too because our generation of parents were extremely patriotic. That was the thing. My dad went to war, your dad went to war. When World War II was around and they had to be drafted or join or whatever, however they got into the war, they felt it was their duty, and they did it. And they left and went to a foreign country, But then this next generation, when they had to leave, they couldn't understand the protests. And it really made for a lot of resentment in the country because they had no idea of these people burning their draft cards and things like that. It was just very, very hard for the older generation to take. And again, I was, kind of removed. We were lucky your father didn't have to go, get involved in it. And it didn't touch us personally, and yet I did have, people that were over there and did get hurt, and some of them that died. But I always felt we were very, very lucky that we didn't have to directly get involved with that.
What did you think about the Watergate scandal?
Forrest Gump's or what?
Forrest Gump hit it right in the head there. When I first heard about it, I didn't think anything more than like a college prank or something where you're going around and finding out what the different fraternities were up to and things like that. I just thought it was just kind of like fun and games. It was just a little exaggeration of one party to the other as opposed to one fraternity versus the other. But when they started lying about it and lying to the American people, then one lie got bigger than the other, and you lie for me, I'll lie for you, and then it got to be criminal on the whole thing. But I think when it first, you know, it was a definite break-in. But I don't think I think if they came out and admitted to it, I think that would have just blown right over and not even thought twice about it. My own opinion.
That was another real biggie, obviously, that's why you're asking about it. I think journalism really came into play a great deal because they kept at it and picking away and with the reporters. And, you know, before then, really, the government was more or less sacred. And, you know, they didn't really get to be put on the line like that. And bit by bit, as they picked them apart, and one person fell, then the next person fell, and you know, pretty soon it was like a domino effect, and boom, you know, until you finally got to President Nixon. And I'll always remember that day that he resigned, because of course it was on television, and here again the media, you know, we were into times where everything was being covered, which once probably would have not been covered. And to watch him, and I kept thinking about, you know, his family, and how hard that must have been for his whole family. For a person to have to admit, you know, especially, I mean, the highest official in the world, and to have to admit that he made a mistake, even though he didn't technically admit to that, but he did by resigning. And it just, you know, it was a very, very sad time. And I think as a result of that, you know, there's been lots of, now I think that's where when you get all these, well, Clinton's having such trouble filling some of his cabinet posts, because now the media and the Senate hearings and everything pick to want to make sure that perhaps, you know, down the road we're not going to have some scandal. And I think it all started with the Watergate, when they started realizing that government officials weren't up on this pedestal that we had always had them on.
And there's always some young reporter out there looking for an opportunity to open up a case like this. Word is, the rumor has it that there's a young guy up there up on Smith Hill, works for WKTV, that's just looking for an opportunity like this to open up a can of worms. Won't get into names though.
But you wouldn't know him, Chris, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
When did you get your first TV?
My first TV was it was a black and white set, and it was kind of neat because it was an instant on, and in those days you used to have to turn the TV on and wait for 30 seconds before it would warm up and finally come on. But I think I was in, I think I just got out of barber school. I had my own little apartment, and I got a TV and a stand, and it was kind of my new toy. So it was black and white, and it was a 19-inch, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
Well, my own first TV probably would have been when I went to college. I took a black and white TV to college. But I can remember when my parents got their first television, you know, and that was the big excitement. And we were one of the first people in the neighborhood to have a TV. So, you know, all the kids would come walking in. You know, in those days, it's not like when your friends come troopsing in and open the refrigerator. I mean, when you go into somebody's house, you know, you kind of tiptoed around and you didn't sit down unless you were asked, and you did, God forbid, you would ever open somebody's refrigerator, because you know, the people would never believe that someone would do that. And everybody was looking at this thing, and they're more like a radio, really. You know, the first ones, because they had all the tubes and everything. And the screens were small.
12-inch,
But
10-inch, 12-inch.
well, you know, we used to enjoy it, and they used to have the shows that we had. Like, it wasn't on all the time. It would be on in the morning. You'd have the Today Show and the news, and then it wouldn't be on again probably until like maybe 5 or 6 o'clock news. And if you turned it on during the day, you'd get a pattern. It's that, like that testing pattern that you see now, and it'd be this hum kind of thing. But no, I take that back. It wouldn't be for it, because we used to have shows after school, like Howdy Doody and Pinky Lee.
But they didn't have soap operas.
Oh no, they didn't have
No
those.
soap operas. They hadn't figured that one out yet. So you would have like the morning, the Today Show would come on, and they'd have what they have today out in the street. They would show the people waving and what have you. And then along about 10 o'clock, they would just stop broadcasting until, say, 3:30, 4 o'clock or something like that, and then it would go into the night. But I think all TVs went off. I think it was before Jack Parr in that. The TVs used to go off right after the
The
news,
news.
and that was it. And then they came up with the Late Show, and then they thought that was a neat idea, the Late Show. So.
But I can remember, I don't know if it was Pinky Lee or Howdy Doody or one of these things that you could send away for, and you could get this plastic thing that you could put over
Put on
your TV.
Screen, right.
And then they'd have some kind of a game or something, and you could play along with them by writing on that plastic screen that you put on there. And we used to think that would, I mean, here you people with your video games, and that would never entertain, but we thought that was the greatest thing in the world,
Right.
to have something like that.
That was close to color TV. It was a colored paper.
And I do remember when we got our first color TV, and that was when I was in college. Came home, and all of a sudden there was this great big console. It was like, a 25-inch console, big piece of furniture. And I was
23.
Was it 23? Oh, it was big to me. And we went from a 20 or 15-inch or whatever we had to something like that. And that was when my brother was young, and we couldn't get over the fact that we had gotten this, color TV. And that was when I was in college, I think. Would that be right?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm that old. Not sure. That's what you're telling me.
I just remember that old TV when you got the next one.
What are and what were your feelings about rock and roll, and what were your favorite groups?
Rock and roll. When I was a young man, my parents took us on a trip down to see my uncle, and he had a little tape recorder, and that was kind of a like a VCR by today's standards. And we all would stand there and talk to it and things like that. And at the time they had Elvis Presley's "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," and they used to like to get me going, and they had me singing it. And somewheres down there in Patterson, New Jersey, there's probably still a tape recording of your father singing "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog" by Elvis Presley in my own version. So, but I liked Elvis, and later on the Beatles. Yeah, I liked music.
And I had a babysitter who was a teenager, and she's the one that introduced my sister and I to rock and roll, and she loved Elvis, and she had all his records. And I can remember I don't know if it was for our birthday or some gift or something, she gave us some 78 records, and they were Elvis, "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," and "Jailhouse Rock," and a couple of those. And my sister and I thought we were so cool because we had those, and they were the teenagers, and I don't know, we might have been 10, 11, something like that. But then I do remember the Beatles, and the shock that they made of the whole thing, coming in with that long hair, which now is absolutely nothing.
Actually, the Beatles' long hair, they had outlines around the ears, and they were squared off in the back, and they were very, very trim. But by today's standards, they would have like a businessman's haircut around the sides and in the back. And the only thing that made them look like they had long hair is because they never had a part. They just combed everything forward, and they cut off straight in the front. And when we were in school, there was always a school policy of no Beatle haircuts. They didn't want any Beatle haircuts like the hair was coming down over the front of your eyes. That was against the school policy to have that.
You sound like a barber.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little bit.
What do you think about the civil rights movement of the 1960s?
You want to start with that one?
Well, it probably stems back to when I was in 3rd grade, to be very honest with you, when we took a trip to Florida. And I can remember we went on the train, and I remember going through in Georgia and South Carolina and all those places, and there were all these shacks and shanties, and I couldn't figure, we looked at them, we had no idea what they were, and my parents told us that that's where the Negro people lived. And I couldn't understand how people could live in something like that. And at one station, the door was open, and there was actually dirt floors in those. And I just couldn't imagine people could live like that. And of course, they had outhouses and things like that. And we got to Florida, and we went visiting places, and we had gone to a supermarket for some reason or another, and there were 2 drinking fountains. Colored drinking fountain, white people's drinking fountain. And I can remember there was a long line, it was about 10 or 11 people, and it was at the white one, and there was nobody at the colored one. and my sister and I don't know if we didn't see the signs or didn't care about the signs or whatever, but we went and got that one because we were really thirsty. And everybody just went crazy. Oh my God, you drink out of the Negro one. Oh no, you're going to turn black. Well, I stayed up all night thinking I was going to turn black. I had no idea, But this is the prejudice that was down there. And when we went down there, because we took the train, we didn't have a car or anything, so we took the bus where we went. And as soon as you walk in the bus, there's these big signs. Colored people in the back. If white person needs your seat, get up. And that's the way. And that made the biggest impression on me. And then later on, when the civil rights movement really took off, I always remembered that and thought, they aren't being treated fairly, these people. And I think that Martin Luther King, was really a wonderful leader for them because of his nonviolent policies. It was very unfortunate when he did get killed, because that's when the big turmoil really, not that there wasn't before then, but that really triggered the people who were trying to get him to change his ways anyway. I think, I'm not so sure, and I'm sure if you went down south now, you would still see a lot of signs of prejudice. I think there's still a lot of problems. I remember them trying to allow black people to go to universities, the University of Alabama, and watching, George Wallace defy everybody to not let the federal government to not let these people come in. And I guess I was never raised with an awful lot of prejudice like that, so it was always very hard for me to understand that. And yet, when I went to school and to college, when we first got there, there were black people there, but they were trying very hard to, like if you couldn't say you didn't want a black roommate, or that sort of thing. By the time we left and graduated, they wanted their own floors, and their own dorms, their own cafeteria. They didn't want anything to do. It was almost like it was a reverse kind of thing.
They want to be left alone and keep away from us instead of trying to intermingle.
Yeah, they wanted to, to switch it again. They didn't want to desegregate. They wanted to segregate back again. So, and there were times when it was annoying too, because it seemed like the black people always got more aid than anyone else because they were a minority group, and they got all the work study and things like that. And I can remember, some of the girls on my floor going down and being able to go down to this department store and buying all these beautiful clothes. And my roommates and I, kind of looked at them and said, "How can you afford those things?" And they'd say, "Well, we get $200 a month free," because it was a minority grant kind of thing. And here, we were, trying to struggle with $5 a week, and that would be the allowance that I got when I was in college. So, there were things like that was annoying about it, but I'm not quite sure that, I don't know if you'd ever make up for all the pain that we've caused black people in this country.
You look at something like that and you're envious because they're getting these grants, these gifts, and yet, for centuries as a white person that was the biggest gift you could have, as being a white person, because you could go from, poor people to president. But if you were black, you're lucky to get an education, really. So, terrible.
What were your feelings about hippies? Were you one?
Hippies.
How could
No,
you ask
I
a
wouldn't.
barber if he was going to be a long-haired hippie, Christopher? Come on now.
I was never a hippie, and I could never understand hippies because of being a barber.
Bad for business, right, Jerry?
That's right. Yeah. But several of the guys I went to school with ended up, I guess you'd have to call them hippies. We're friends, and that we get together for not formal reunions, but we get together when we come home from school and that. And I always got a kick out of the people with the real long hair. They end up putting it up in the rubber band, putting it behind their head, and it looked like they had short hair, shorter than mine, because theirs was around their ears, and the only way you could tell they had long hair was that going down the middle of their back, but the rest of it was all off of their forehead. It almost looked like your father's haircut, where it's all combed straight back and straight back on the sides, and I could never figure out their whole philosophy, and they wanted to be different, but yet they look more like my father than I did, I guess, with their haircuts. Some of them.
I think that was just a way of belonging to something. You know, it was a phase that people went through. The ones that I know best would be the ones, again, that were in college, and I don't know, they just always seem, a lot of times they were very dirty looking, because that seemed to go along with the fact that, you know, they would wear the same clothes all the time or something along those lines. And they did a lot of the protesting because they wanted peace. This was, all part of their ideas. But I never really got involved too much with them. You know, you just kind of, they were there. College is a place where there's a lot of different groups. So you just, just everybody has their space, and as long as they don't bother you. You've got your hippies, you've got your, militant protesters and all that kind of thing. And I didn't, I really didn't pay much attention to them.
What did you think about the Manson murders?
Manson? That was a shocking thing. I think that was the first time that anybody ever heard of such a senseless type crime, and no one could ever figure out why something like that would happen. And I think it was probably the first time that you get into like these drug situations where they have the drive-by things, and today is so common, senseless killings and things, and it's all drug related. And it was just a shocking story.
When you come up from, small town Frankfort, New York, and you see these people and the way they act, it just amazed me that this man could dominate these people so much, to have this cult type thing, this group. I never quite understood, that sort of thing. And I don't know, to tell you the truth, he just looked like a creep to me.
Still does.
And he still does, yeah, that's true.
What sports did you participate in or enjoy?
Why don't you start that?
Okay. Well, in the fall I played Speedway, which was a combination of soccer and football and basketball, believe it or not. And your mother used to run up and down. I was a forward, and I loved it. Skinny as a rail in those days, thank you very much. Then I played basketball. I was captain of the girls' basketball team for 2 years in a row. And we were the champs for 7 years straight in Frankfort, thank you very much. Then I played volleyball, and I ran track. I did the hop, step, and jump. I don't know what they call that now. Is
Triple
it
jump.
Triple
jump? Okay. And I did the relay race, and I did, I don't know if I did the 100 meter, something, one of those 100 meter or something like that. And then every once in a while, I'd have to do the high jump if they couldn't find anyone else to do that. The only thing I really didn't like is softball. I never liked girls softball, and I was a cheerleader, so I was involved with, knowing how to do sport or understand football, because in those days the coach used to make the cheerleaders watch game films, and then they would explain to us what was going on, so that we would cheer the right cheer. Because the coach in Frankfurt hated it when people made fools of themselves by cheering for a touchdown when the other team had, trying to get a touchdown when the other team had the ball and stuff. So he wanted to make sure we knew what we were doing.
That's why Ilion always beat Frankfurt, because the cheerleaders from Frankfurt were cheering us on.
Never mind. No, we weren't, because we knew what our team was doing.
All right. I played some baseball, some football, track, a little bit of basketball until I got caught dribbling on the floor and not wiping it up. And joke. I enjoyed all sports, weightliftings and things like that. I enjoyed it all.
What were the fads in your day?
Fads. I remember one of the fads that when we were in school, you used to buy a sweatshirt, and we'd cut the arms off of it and rip them so it would be a real uneven, like vest. And then you'd cut little holes around here and there, and then rip it, and like put it through a wash with Clorox and get it all faded out. And then you'd wear a dress shirt, button down, Madras type
Plaid.
plaids, and that was cool. And that's the guys that were really in style, all right. And then you had the guys that were future hippies of America that used to show up with pajama tops and things like that for school. So that's one of the fads I could think of.
And penny loafers were.
Yeah, we had penny loafers, and Ilion wore White Sox, and the Frankfurt kids laughed at Ilion guys because we had White Sox and they wore Black Sox.
Oh,
Different fads in small towns like that, from one town to the other. They'd laugh at the other ones because you'd stand out. Oh, you could tell the guys from Ilion because he had White Sox on.
I'm trying to think dress-wise what we would. Girls mostly had. We went from not real long skirts, but longer skirts to kind of shorter skirts. And you know, by the time I graduated from high school, I think we were showing our knees, which was very revolutionary, you know, kind of thing to do. But the teachers in those days were, you know, you had dress codes in schools, and
Very
they
much.
enforced it. And I can remember, you know, there were a lot of kids that were college entrance track, you know, in school. Then there were another whole group of girls that were business students, and the business teachers were very strict about the way they looked and the way they dressed because they were supposed to be the future secretaries of the world. And in those days, you didn't necessarily have to go to school to be a secretary. You didn't have to go to college. You know, many of them just right out of high school, so they figured that this was their only training. And I can remember a lot of my friends would try and get these skirts as short as they possibly could get away with. So they'd roll these skirts up, and then
At the waist.
at the waist. So they'd roll them up short, and the
And they
teachers.
had the wide belt.
Yeah, and then the teachers would pull them all down. You know, make them pull them all down again. And one time, one of the girls masking taped her skirt to make it short. You know, she went into the girls' room and she got masking tape and she shortened it to where she wanted to. And I don't know, the heat must have been on or something because it was a wool skirt. And as the day progressed, the masking tape loosened and she didn't know it. And she's walking down the hall and, you know, you can see it's coming apart and everything. Well, one of the business teachers, you know, saw that and she really got in big trouble. I mean, you can get detention after school for wearing your skirt too short and things like that. You know, they allowed it, but I don't know. I'm trying to think of any other fad type things that we had. And I offhand, I can't think of any.
No.
And I'm sure there must have been, but
All
I remember
sensible kids.
hula hoops kind of thing, but that was when we were younger.
Yeah.
You used to play with hula hoops and try and see if you could, you know, keep it wiggling around
And-
your hips.
Remember the old saying, you're out of your tree and things like that, where we have pencils, we'd go through and we'd have it printed out on a pencil, the different
Sayings.
the sayings of the year or the month or whatever.
Do you recall where you were or what you were doing when the following took place, when JFK was killed?
JFK was killed. I was in a barber chair getting my hair cut, and my first thoughts were, how could somebody, I pictured him sitting, you know, something like the Pope, sitting up on top waving to people in a big auditorium or something, and I was wondering how somebody could get so close to him to shoot him like that. And then when it finally came out how he actually was shot, you just couldn't believe it. But I also can remember when that happened, I saw people, because we were on split session because of the school fire. I remember walking up Otsego Street and seeing people and telling them what had happened, what I had heard, and they said they couldn't believe it. And before I could get to where the Flatiron building is now, church bells were ringing and things like that, and people, we went to Annunciation Church, and they had a mass for him. It was just within an hour or two of him being shot, and the whole church was just filled with people praying for him. We hadn't known, you know, at the time, I guess we didn't know that he was dead. But in looking at it by today's standards, if God forbid something should ever happen to our president, I don't think anybody would even think about going to church during the middle of a week like that.
Yeah, I was in Latin class. I can remember that because my Latin teacher just absolutely loved John F. Kennedy, and she was crying hysterically, and it came over the intercom. In our school, they didn't make an announcement. They just all of a sudden put the radio announcement that was going on, and we didn't know what was going on. You know how kids first time, oh, what are they doing? What are they doing? And finally, we all settled down, and we heard what had happened, and the teacher was just crying hysterically, and they dismissed us. We all got to go home early that day, and the church bells, as your father was saying, the church bells in Frankfort were all ringing, and when we got home, we decided to go right to church, and there are 2 Catholic churches in Frankfort, and they were filled with kids, because mostly a lot of the parents, well, of course, a lot of mothers were home in those days, so the mothers were in church, but mostly but everybody went home from work early and everything. It was like an unbelievable, and nobody could understand it, absolutely nobody, and people were just glued to their TV sets and just couldn't imagine that this could happen. And then everybody wanted to see, and then when they saw him, and then when the
Funeral.
well, when Ruby when he got killed,
When he got live TV, that was the first time they would ever.
when Ruby wasn't killed.
Oswald.
Oswald was killed. You just couldn't believe it, because you'd never seen anything like that before in our country, and it was very, very sad. Very sad, because my parents were very, very much for John F. Kennedy. Of course, my dad coming from Ireland, and this being an Irish, family and everything, that was enough for him, and that was it. Plus, he was the first Catholic president, and that was not why he got voted for, but my parents never thought that he would ever win because he was Catholic.
That he came through this area.
And yeah, and my mother
Stopped at Ilion and.
my mother's, until when they sold their house, Grandma finally got rid of. She had this great big pole. She worked in the dress factory, and she had in Mohawk, and the motorcade went around, and she had this great big pole of the bolts of material that came on. It was empty cardboard, and she had stuck all these remnants of things, and she waved that out the window as JFK went by, and she saved that until the day they sold the house. And that was one of her prized possessions, because she had said that that she had seen John F. Kennedy, and it was just a very, very sad thing. And schools were closed for the whole time until the funeral was over, and everybody just watched it.
Do you remember your first car?
My first car, the $50 Lark. My own personal car. Yes, it was a good car. I bought it off of a neighbor. She didn't think that the car was worth $50, but she said it's yours for $50 if you wanted it. So I said I think I can use it, and I ran the thing, I don't know, thousands and thousands of miles, and just minor little things. So I can remember it's a '59 Studebaker. So yes, I remember my first car.
I never had a car before we got married. I never had my license before we got married. I didn't get my license till I was, like 22, 23. I must have been older than that, about 23 or 24.
That's when they were giving them out, wasn't it?
Oh, stop it. And such a rotten thing. And our first one was the Monte Carlo, 70-something.
1971.
71 Monte Carlo. I love that car. It was a green car. It was a beautiful car.
Oh.
And it was really good in the snow and everything. And I remember we were very proud, because it was a demo when we bought it. And the only thing we wanted is we wanted a rear defrost put on it.
That's right.
And because they had just come out with doing that sort of thing, but this one didn't happen to have that on it. And the salesman wanted to get rid of it, and he said, "Oh yes, I'll pay for the rear defrost." And then we kept calling him. "Oh yeah, no, we're going to do it." And finally, we heard that he was going to leave the company, and so your father brought the car down and demanded that we get that rear defrost put on there, because it was in the deal. It was written right on the thing to get it, and so we did.
Do you recall a Cuban Missile Crisis?
I recall it because when I was in school, our football coach and our gym teacher was in the reserves at the time, and they were on standby when all this was going on. And he canceled our gym classes and had everybody in the gymnasium marching, according to how he was marching when he was on weekend maneuvers or whatever they call them. So we were over there marching back and forth, and it's just like we were saying, a few years later, right out of school, people be going in and they be marching off to war, really. So it was a minute to minute. Everybody was thinking they're going to launch missiles, and everybody was thinking, should you run in your basement and get under cover and things like that, because you didn't know what was going to happen. So it was kind of a scary time.
It was. I'll just agree. You know, it wasn't. I remember thinking that you wanted our country to stand up for, you know, what we believed in, and yet if it meant, you know, people being killed and our country, you know, being that close to being bombed and everything, it was a very scary situation.
Everybody knew that Cuba was, 90 miles off of our shores, and it was instilled in our heads that it was 90 miles, and probably you couldn't tell you how far it was from here to Albany, but you knew how far it was from Florida to Cuba.
And nobody thought Khrushchev would ever back down
No.
on that, you
No.
know. Nobody ever thought, you know, he would, because that's just, you know, the opinion everybody had. So that was a real big thing when he did.
Mm-hmm.
What were your feelings about the Gulf War?
Well, the Gulf War when it was all taking place, I couldn't believe that we were actually got ourselves involved in something like this. Watching CNN, you almost watch it thinking that it was like, well, it's going to be over with tonight. So you stayed up late when they first attacked. You stayed up late thinking, you know, when's this all going to be over? Today, tomorrow, the next day, and the guys did a wonderful job over there. But now you have all these different diseases that are coming back, and they're blaming it on the Gulf Wars and things like that. So you pay for, every time you go to war, you always pay for many years after that for one way or another, I guess.
Again, you know, we knew people that, you know,
Sure.
were in reserves that had to disrupt their lives, and people that you'd never dream of. I know a friend of mine from Frankfurt's husband had to go, and she was left with the 3 boys, and you don't assume after 20 some odd years of marriage that your husband's going to be going off to war. You know, it was a real big thing, and a tough situation. I think that again, I'm glad that we are not directly involved in we were never directly involved in something like that, but it's something that I guess you have to do if you're the caretaker of the world. That's what we seem to be.
We're getting there. Yeah.
Do you remember the Alien High School fire?
I'll let Mom handle that one.
Well, I certainly do, because my uncle was the fireman that was killed in that fire, and I know that it was obviously a very sad situation for us personally, family-wise. I always remember that they think that someone started that fire just so that they could increase their Easter vacation, because it happened over Easter vacation. I remember my cousin, all of us coming back from the funeral, and my cousin, who it was his dad that died, said, "Carol, you see that boy out right there?" And I said, "Yeah, that's who they think started the fire." And I can remember thinking, how can my cousin, you know, just calmly say something like that when his father was killed in a situation like that? It's got to be, you know, really, really tough. It was a big tragedy for the whole valley. But you were involved in it because you were in school here.
Well, we were in school. Yeah, we were in bed waiting to go to school the next day. It was on a Sunday night, and my brother woke me up and said, "Quick, the school's on fire." Oh, you always think of maybe just a waste paper basket or something like that. You don't think it's ever that big. But we lived up by the Ilion Moose Club, and when I looked out the back window facing toward the school, you could see the whole sky aglow. So from where we lived, you could see that fire was really going. So we all got in the car and we went down to see what was going on, and the whole town was there. And as we were walking up the Weber Ave, I remember somebody saying that one of the firemen was killed, and it was Mr. Seymour. And one of my best friends at the time was Carol's cousin, Mike, and so I was thinking about him, and you know, for days after that, you just can't get that out of your mind of how senseless that whole thing was. And, but we all chipped in, and as the fire was still being put out for days after that, I can remember getting a human chain, and up on the 3rd floor we were taking desks out of the one room and then handing them down to the next guy, and we're taking all the desks and all the different furniture out of the rooms so we could open up another school up in West Frankfort. And we were sending the younger kids up there, and then we were moving these desks down on Weber Ave, which is now the junior high. But within the day or two, we had everything all moved out, and we were back in school by I think Wednesday or Thursday of that week. So.
But you ended up on double sessions, then, didn't you? Or
Uh,
how did that work? I mean, or
Yeah,
was that
we
afterwards?
went early in the morning, you know, it's much like what you people are doing. The junior high went in the afternoons, so we had to be out by 12:26 or something like that, if I recall, and we had the split sessions just like you and Mohawk have right now.
The sad thing I think too about that was that my uncle was on vacation, and he didn't really have to go to that fire. But as soon as the fire bell, rang, he left. But he was on vacation and he wasn't even supposed to be there. So that's even sadder when you think about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, we're finished? Well, I just want to say goodbye to Mr. Vale because, I feel like I've done this twice now, so I feel like I know you, Mr. Vale, pretty well here, and I hope we gave you the same answers or some similar things as we did 3 years ago, because we're getting older now and our memories are fading.
I hope
very
we haven't
quickly.
impeached ourselves from the other ones here, you know?
I know. I hope you don't have a copy of our last one because I don't remember what we said. But it's
Okay.
been fun. Thank you.
Thank you and good night.